Okay, we are starting in chapter 6. I've coupled these sections together as well because they run just as much together as the ancient Aegeans and the Grecian cultures did. We're looking at chapter 6 at Etruscan art. So if you follow my pointer, over here, down in here, would have been Greece in the ancient Aegean cultures. So now we're in Italy. So modern day Italy. It's very unknown where the Etruscans originated from. Some historians say they came from the north and came down. They occupied the middle of Italy before the Romans wiped them out completely and took over the culture. We learned about them by studying their large necropoli that were which are necropolis. We've already talked about that. It's basically cities of the dead. But their necropoli were formed as almost like large homes, so they very much mimicked their homes. So that's how we know a lot about how they lived and what their housing looks like. The Etruscan temples and sculptures are influenced by archaic Greece. They were very much experts in bronze and terracotta, so that hollow bronze cast and terracotta molding. Language and customs are different than the Romans. They used the Greek alphabet. So then when we go through the timeline, that's why historians have classified them within the Greek periods. They never really formed a nation. They were just separate areas of people. The city-states fell into the Roman hands around the 4th and 5th century. By the 8th and 7th century, they were highly skilled seafarers. So before that, they became skilled seafarers for trades and things like that. The origin of the Etruscans occupied the region to the north of Rome between the Arno and the Tiber River, to the west of a mountain range. The Romans were the first subject people of the Etruscans, and then later they conquered them. So at first they were subjects of the Etruscans, and then they came back and stole everything like they normally did. So we've got 3 periods that we're looking at here: the Orientalizing, Archaic, and Classical / Hellenistic. So if you look at the time ranges, they don't run parallel to the closely, but they don't run specifically parallel to the Greeks, but it's fairly close. So the Orientalizing period emerged as pretty much a distinct artistic culture about 900 to 700 BCE. Oh, the dates are a little different here. So your book says 700 to 600 BC, so that's where we're going to go. That's what we're going to go with. The 7th century traded with Mesopotamians, so that inspired the Etruscans to use monsters and other Orientalizing motifs in their funerary goods. So we see influences of Mesopotamia there. The Archaic era, the Etruscans constructed temples of mud brick and wood with columns and stairs only in the front and terracotta on the roof. That's why none of them are standing now. The Etruscans buried their dead beneath huge earthen tumuli and multi-chambered tombs resembling their houses, like I had said before. We've got these tombs their tombs featured fresco paintings depicting banquets and funerary games. Then we're looking at the Classical / Hellenistic era. There's not a distinction between the two. The artists kind of excel in bronze casting, engraving mirrors, and carving stone sarcophagi. So we're going to talk about some of those sarcophagus as well. The Etruscan architects constructed arched gateways. So instead of what we see as the corbelled vaulted arches, we're starting to see arched gateways. Gateways often with engaged columns or plastered framing the arched passageways. So first off, we've got the Orientalizing period. The Etruscans successfully mined iron, tin, copper, and silver, creating a great wealth of environment. We have a pin on the right. If you look on the left, that kiln, I guess you would call it, is in the shape of what their tumuli would look like. We've got a video here that I'll put the slideshow up on, I'll put it up on Google Classroom so you can watch the video if you want. But it's very interesting. It talks a lot about the ancient Etruscans. They were a very openly loving culture. So as far as the love between a man and a woman, it wasn't necessarily always sacred. They were a very openly, we'll just say openly loving culture. That's why the Romans saw it and they were like, yeah! And so they thought they were better than them and took them over. The Archaic period, commonly known as the Vitruvius period, which a Roman author, civil engineer, and military engineer during, that's who Vitruvius was. He was an engineer during the 1st century BC. He kind of coined this era. Known for its he was known for his multi-volume work about architecture. So in this period, we see a lot of Etruscan gods that very much mimic the Grecian gods. So, but they're just named differently. So we have Minerva, who is Athena, and so one of our artifacts is the Minerva Temple. Here is the compare and contrast between an Etruscan temple and a Grecian temple. Like I said, there's only one Scylla in a Grecian temple. The colonnade runs all the way around, and then we have the stairs with the styliobites that run all the way around as well. The portico here is only in the front, we see the the columns here, and then typically they have 3 different Scyllae. So this is the Temple of Minerva, or this is a terracotta sculpture which sits on the roof of it. We want to make a comparison between the core and this figure. You can see the similarities, the drapery of the cloths, so you can tell that there's a lot of trading that happens here. This person is called the Apollo of V. And then again, we've got terracotta sarcophagi. We see the evidence of male and female love and almost equal power shared between the two because of a lot of their loving poses. Their legs become more flattened on these, but this is the sarcophagus of a reclining couple. Again, I believe it's another one of your artifacts. And there's the video that you can watch. This just shows you some of the Etruscan tombs. Again, look at them. They look like they're houses. Even the inside, they have carvings. They have what would have been on the wall. These right here would have been where the sarcophagi was or where the body was laid to rest. Here's another temple. What we're seeing here, there we go. What we're seeing here are the frescoes from the walls. They're showing the games. It was a very bloody culture, like most of the cultures were at this time. We see loving figures reclining together at a banquet here. We see warriors fighting here in blood and entrails pulling out. This would have been the door into the afterlife or into, well, quote unquote, heaven. Chimera of Azura, can't say the word, Erozo. A chimera is a fire-breathing animal. Its legend originated from southern Asia Minor. It's got a lion head, goats growling on its back right here, and then a serpentine tail. It's beautifully cast out of bronze. And so we're kind of seeing the difference between the classical Greek sculpture and this going on. It almost has more of a Hellenistic aspect because of the high emotional intensity in it. Then we have the Capitoline wolf. So if you look over here, and we'll end up watching this video during class, but it's myth and legends of the Roman community. So we've got the story of Romulus and Remus from about 750 BC. It's still used in Rome today. This is called the Capitoline wolf. What we're seeing here on this slide, oops, turned the page too early, is the 5th century was the golden age for Greece. So about 509 BCE, Romans expelled the last of the Etruscan kings. So the Romans saw that the Etruscans were too corrupt and they wanted the power for themselves. So they kind of fought back and forth. They took control but still allowed the Etruscans to have their kings. And then finally, about 509, completely, no more kings, totally and completely took over the Etruscan people. They replaced the monarchy with a republic form of government. Grecians expelled the Etruscans out of the seas. So again, basically all the Etruscans are being wiped out between Greece and Rome. Classical Etruria. When we talk about the Etruscans, their land would have been called Etruria. Etruria. There were no more lavish tombs after that. A lot of the art was pretty much gone. Not a lot of riches lasted, but they expelled, but they still excelled in that casting statues in bronze and terracotta. So this is actually considered an Etruscan sculpture. However, it is the story of the founding fathers of Romulus and Remus. Whether some of it's true or not, we're not sure. But we'll talk about this myth during class. And then the very last, sadly enough, the very last considered Etruscan or Etruria statue is this gentleman. What we're seeing here is, this is an orator. Orator, my goodness, orator. He is an Etruscan man who spoke out a lot for the Etruscan people in the Roman Senate. You can tell that by you see his kindly face, but almost defeated face. He's got his hand held out, almost asking for, or pleading for the people. But we see the Roman dress here. Here inscribed on the bottom is Etruria, or Etrurian, and it's basically, again, pleading for those people. So now we're moving into Rome. So we know that Rome pretty much took over many, many areas. Excuse me. We know that Rome took over many areas, expanded a lot. What they did, they ended up being a huge melting pot, taking things that worked from other cultures and putting it into their own. They also were very enamored of the perfect human form. So the founding of Rome happened about 753 BC, but then remember the Etrurian kings still were able to hold power, and so, but the Roman Republic completely expelled them out and began in 509. We've got early and high Roman Republic, don't really need to know a lot about that. We've got late Roman Empire, and then, we talked about Romulus and Remus in the last slide. Basically, they were so powerful that they suckled on a she-wolf. That's how so they were brought up by a wolf. The Etrurian people were ruled by kings, but then they came in, Romulus and Remus came in and overthrew their government and replaced the Senate. Romulus and Remus established a democracy. Wars and diplomacy helped establish the empire. And then later on, we'll see civil war emerge out of that. Usually, the patrons of the art and of a lot of the politicians were the wealthiest citizens. They are of the patronage class. They cared about the general good and of the public projects, so they funded a lot of these, and then they had people under them that were kind of like what do you call those people whenever they follow around a posse? They were like their posse. So the very rich had a lot of people in their posse. Again, we will watch this. So the Roman timeline starts with the monarchy, but that's the Etrurian monarchy between 753. They still consider the Republic 753 to 27 because both of it occurred at the same time. But again, the Republic officially started in 509. We've got early empire, high empire, and late Empire. Okay. We already talked about that. Let's see. During the 450 years of the Roman Republic, they conquered the rest of Italy and then expanded into France, Spain, Turkey, North Africa, and Greece. Rome became very Greek, highly Greek influenced, or Hellenized is what it would have been called. Rome was filled with Greek architecture, lots of literature, statues, wall paintings, mosaics, pottery, glass. So pretty much just took over the Grecian Empire. And we've got a bit of a timeline here during the Roman Republic. So things to know: Senate was literally a council of elders. The dictator would establish control under extraordinary circumstances. So they would, excuse me. Sorry. The dictator would take control. Typically, the dictator was the general at the time. He was usually a wealthy landowner or a patron. The plebeian class were farmers, merchants, and free slaves. And then you have the poor class. So the partition class were the upper class. The plebeian class were the middle class. And then you have the lower or poor class. So if you look at this architecture, you're really seeing the connection between Greek influence and Etruscan influence. We have the Thalos on the right side that was taken from the Grecian people, and then we've got the Temple of Portunus on the right side, which were taken from the Etruscan people. Okay, this is a common Roman temple. It's gone away with the 3 cella, so it's got the 1 cella in there, but it has only a single portico with engaged columns all the way around, and a single set of stairs that do not extend all the way around. We also are finding new construction. The introduction of cement, so the Romans are the ones who invented cement, allowed them to create larger structures and more impossible forms or structures. The 4 big ones to note are the barrel vault, the groin vault, the hemispherical dome with oculus or oculi, which is this, so hemispherical dome, and then a fenestrated sequence of groin vaults. What a fenestrated sequence means is they run in a line, so fenestrated groin vaults. We will see these constructions continue through the Renaissance and into contemporary arts. You do need to know these 4 things. You need to know these 4 architectural structures. This was an innovative material. Concrete was completely innovative. Before this, they had wood, which created very destructive material. It was a very destructive material. But what they would do is they would create wood frames and then pour the concrete into them. Once it turns rough, they would cover it in stucco or polish it down. But they would typically cover it into something. Okay. Verism or veristic is a term used whenever it's highly dramatized. So we see the wrinkles of this gentleman. The more wrinkles a senator has or a knowledgeable person has, the more knowledgeable they are. Sorry, slide 23, I'm going ahead of myself. So, these were specific portraits and they were meant to show the person. But we need to, typically these portraits were very stern, very highly lined faced again. Okay, so Julius Caesar was a dictator. This was kind of the end of the Republic. So Julius Caesar came along. Most of you know the story of him, so I'm not going to go deeply into it. But this is a portrait of supposed to be a portrait of Julius Caesar. All right. We're on slide 25. So after Are we on slide 20? Yes, I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so former slave art. Slaves were either able to buy their own freedom or be set free. So if a slave was set free and became a part of the plebeian class, they were welcome to create their own work. This is a grave marker for a slave, and you can and then his slaves. Pompeii. So you know a lot about Pompeii. Again, we went on the field trip last year to Pompeii at the Union Station, and it was absolutely incredible. But basically what happened was Mount Vesuvius erupted with little to no warning. A lot of the issue was that people of this area had never seen an eruption of a volcano or had no clue even what it was. So a lot of the people died not because of the lava, but because that the hot ash came down and basically baked them from the inside out. It was incredible. Okay. Well, again, we'll talk more about this stuff. So the House of Viti. Individuals were bound to others. So we've got that patron-client relationship that we talked about. The patron were the more educated and wealthy that would protect the interests of the client. So we've got the partition class, which would have been the patrons. The client would have been the plebeian class. And so it was almost like a parent-child relationship. The patron needed to protect those under them, needed to protect their clientele. The patron was typically more educated and wealthier. The size of the patron clientele group showed the power that the patron held. Again, followed them like a posse. This is the house of a this is a typical Roman house within a city. So if you look at all these, we will go through this more during class time. But freedmen, this house is so notable. The House of Veti is so notable because men who freed themselves or their owners freed them, owned this house. We've got the atrium in the middle of the house. This was in Pompeii. That's why Pompeii is so notable, is because that's the reason why we have so much information. So now we're going to run into painting styles. So there are 3 different types of wall paintings for the Roman people. We've got the first style, which is a painted style which mimics, different types of material. So they use the true fresco, and so it would look like they almost had blocks of like marble in this one and granite in this one, and so it looked like different styles. You will still see this today in different homes. True fresco, again, is painting on wet plaster, then polishing it to look like marble or stone. Then we have the second style. It didn't imitate, but it gave the walls an illusion of 3D imagery. So inside a typical Roman home, it was in a city, so there were no windows because they couldn't have the noise or the dust or the nasty from the outside coming in, so they needed to paint these things on the wall to make the room look much bigger. What we're looking at, here are some more in second style. What we're looking at here is linear perspective. That would be this is atmospheric perspective. So what we're seeing here are the things in the foreground are typically clearer than the things in the background. Again, second style painting. Then we get into the early empire. So we're moving from Republic to early empire. This is the third style painting. Usually it's a mixture of both. First style and second style. We have the picture in the middle and then the blocks around. The blocks of types of, this is third style. Little tiny picture in the middle, blocks of color around it, and then the fourth style is a mix of all 3 of those, first, second, and third style. So try to name these. Give yourself a second and try to name these. Who's what and what's what. So A would be fourth style, B would be first style, C would be third style, and D would be second style. Okay, mosaics usually covered the floors, but they also occasionally covered the walls. They would use that little pebble mosaic pattern just like the Greeks did occasionally. All right, so we're looking at portraits here. These are different types of portraits on this side. They were, it was very rare to have a portrait done of yourself. So these two are, and then we've got still lifes. A still life painting is a representation of inanimate objects, usually seen within mostly forced style painting. Now, we're looking at the Roman Republic art compared to the imperial or the early Roman imperial art. Can you tell the difference? The Republics really it was almost like it was a jumping off point from the Hellenistic Greeks, which is a high possibility. So we've got those high wrinkles that shows intelligence and shows wisdom to this perfect form that we're seeing. So early, there we go. Okay, so what we have here is after Caesar died, Rome became in a civil war. So Julius Caesar died. Rome was in a civil war. Octavian, which is Julius Caesar's grandnephew, crushed Mark Antony because he came in and tried to take over everything. Oh, Aaron. Mark Antony was actually Roman. I forgot about that. It wasn't Alexander the Great or Mark Antony being in Greek. He was actually Roman, and he and Cleopatra of Egypt ended up committing suicide and making Egypt another province of Rome. So Mark Antony died, and so then Octavian, who was Julius Caesar's grandnephew, came into power. Augustus was then we've got Augustus who came into power, who was not yet 32 years old when he came to power. Caesar was declared a god after his death, and Augustus declared himself as the son of God. So, you know how hard it is to speak out against the Son of God. It doesn't really work. Augustus means great or Augustus means great. It's Latin, obviously. Rome still held with the same constitutional offices, but Augustus occupied all the key positions. He was commander and chief. He was basically dictator. Augustus was known as Prax Augustus, which means Augustus of peace. He brought a lot of peace and prosperity to the Mediterranean after the uproar which Julius Caesar committed. It was very much a time of great imperial portraits, covered with writings that tells of the emperor's great deeds. We're really starting to see propaganda art again. And then 36. So early empirical art. We've got Cupid right here riding a dolphin, which is in reference of the connection to Venus and Augustus. So again, remember, Augustus is a god. This is very much a Greek idealization of form, but we kind of have a generalized face. Augustus wouldn't have looked like this because by this time he was much older, but so they portrayed him as being young and youthful, so then people didn't think he was old and decaying and about to die. So he's in contrapposto. His position suggests God and man. His bare feet gives him that heroic nature. So when you see bare feet in Roman art, it's very much, it's about heroism. We've got gem carvings that the Romans were gem carvings, which they were famous for. And now we're going into altar. This is an altar of peace. The so-called Maison Curie, or square house, is an ancient Roman temple located in Nimes in the south of France. Nimes was founded as a Roman colony during the 1st century BCE. The Maison Curie is an extremely well-preserved ancient Roman building. Sorry, my brain stopped for a second. It's a very well-preserved ancient Roman building, so it gives us a lot of information. Oh, sorry, this is Masonry. My bad. This is the Altar of Peace. Some of my slides are mislabeled. We see the Greek influence here with the key and meander patterns. We see a lot of the same type of, this reminds of the Pantheon procession frieze. But we are also seeing the introduction of children here, which typically doesn't happen, and they're turned and conversing instead of all facing one way. This is the Masonry. We see the engaged columns. We see this egg and dart pattern, which was, I believe, a Grecian pattern. Okay, so here what we're seeing are the aqueducts. The Romans, you guys should know about the aqueducts. The Romans built these as waterways all the way around and across their empire. Here's another aqueduct. Okay, so now we're getting into Nero's Golden Palace. So, sorry, hold on. Needed a drink. Here is a type of palace. We're seeing the structure here. We've got the dome going on with the jutouts here. What style do you think this is? First, second, or third, or fourth style of Roman wall paintings? Yes, it would be the fourth style. Nero, obviously you guys know that Rome had a lot of terrible, terrible rulers. We have Nero, who was an emperor who was basically crazy. We'll talk about him more in class. The Flavians come next. So, Nero was so terrible and he was facing certain assassination, so he committed suicide in about 68 CE, which ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So he was basically the end of those Julius Caesar, Claudius dynasty. A year of civil strife happened. They went through 3 or 4 emperors in a very short period of time, and then in comes the Vespasians, which was a general who served under Claudius and Nero. So we had a quick succession of general rulers there. Okay, lots and lots of information on this. We've got the Flavian Amphitheater, which is now the Colosseum. But basically, they ripped down and tore down anything that had to do with Nero. And at this time, there was a huge golden statue of Nero on this site. They ripped it down and built the Flavian Amphitheater, or the Colosseum. But it was originally known as the Flavian Amphitheater. So we've got Pompeii Amphitheater. So before we had the theater in Greece, which was just half of this, an amphitheater goes all the way around, has excellent acoustics in the middle, but basically Pompeii versus Flavian Amphitheater or Colosseum. Then we have a revival of the verism or veristic style. They go from that idealized form into this highly exaggerated, so the wrinkles come back. This seems pretty perfect, except if you look at her hair, they are chiseled out of stone, literally. This era brought portraits of people of all ages. It wasn't just old, it wasn't just old, wasn't just young. Whichever age they were, they took it to extreme. So we've got extreme youth versus extreme age. Okay, so we also see triumphal arches start to emerge. This is the Triumph of Titus. It's a triumphal arch. Titus dies, so he was a ruler who dies, and his younger brother exceeds him, but in his honor, he erects this triumphal arch. The arch commemorates military victories and buildings of roads and different bridges, so lots of reliefs that occur. Here are 2 different reliefs that we see. Now we go into the High Empire. So again, we've got that corbelled arch or vault that we have been looking at. So I want you to take a second to look at this slide while I take a drink of water. So we've got that post and lintel construction that we've used, and we also have the corbelled vault that we've used. Those are the top two. We're starting to see the arch occur, which can be done with blocks and bricks. But the introduction of concrete allows us to use barrel vaulting, so extend these a lot longer, and groin vaulting. What these help is to allow more light in as well, and a greater selection, I guess, or choice with architectural structure. So here are some groin vaults. They're gorgeous. Now these are more Greek and Baroque and Renaissance. The rib here is called an arras. Don't necessarily need to know that, but they also allow in later years, especially the the Gothic people, to add more lighting, to add more windows. So this is the Forum of Trajan. This is one of our artifacts, and we'll talk more about this in class. Trajan was a ruler. The Senate ended up assassinating him, but before they did, he appointed an elderly Nerva, which died within 16 months after him. So again, a lot of strife and a lot of upheaval. And again, we will talk about the Trajan temple plan more at length during class. Here's some more. There's the Basilica of Ulta, or Ulpia, which is in 4 right here. Okay, gorgeous. Trajan column, we'll talk more about this. It is a continuous relief all the way up. It's incredible. Excuse me. Sorry, my throat's getting dry, guys. So, now we want to talk a little bit about the Pantheon and Hadrian. Hadrian was appointed by Trajan. He was a connoisseur of the arts and, in fact, created his own artistic developments himself. So we've got arches and statues which were erected anywhere he traveled. Walls even up in England, which were still there. Roads. He was a historian. Wonderful. So the Pantheon was built under Hadrian's rule. What we're seeing is the use of coffers here, which is allowing the architects to build these massive domes and the concrete not weigh it down so it breaks. So it alleviates some of the pressure because it eliminates a lot of this, a lot of the weight that's on top of it. This is one of our artifacts, and we will talk about it later as well. This is Hadrian's country villa, is what you would call it. But this is one of Hadrian's architectural styles. He created this himself. It almost looks like a pumpkin because it's got all these ridges in it, and he ended up being laughed at by one of the architects of, I believe, the Pantheon. This is just a little story. He was laughed at one of the architects of the Pantheon, and that architect ended up just dying mysteriously. But what we're seeing are a lot of influence of Grecian influences here. We've got caryatids here. We've got his own construction here, and then we have the post and lintel, or arcuated lintels are what it's called when it's the post and lintel, and then post, those sort of things. Okay, we will go through that. Petra, a lot of times this is associated with the Middle East because Rome had such a huge expanded empire. So we're seeing a mix of everything here. We're seeing a mix of different styles within the Grecian culture as well as in the Etruscan culture. Okay, what we're seeing here is in the big cities such as Rome and Ostia, which were port cities founded by Trajan, or not, Ostia was a port city founded by Trajan. Romans lived in small enclosed apartment buildings, and not a lot of light were left in. Am I on the right side? Sorry, guys. Okay. Sorry, I'm not saying the right thing here. There we go. Ta-da. A lot of them couldn't afford houses or couldn't buy a house because it was extremely expensive. So they could buy a house in the country for what 1 year's of rent costs. and an apartment in the city. But they chose to live a lot in the city. But this would be a classic Roman apartment building. What we're looking at here, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back, are two different styles. We have this where there's no ground line at all. Then they're just kind of floating around and running around everywhere. And then over here we have a static ground line, but it's not as... Which is more moving, do you think? Artistically and for your eye. Stop and think a second of which one engages your eye more. So if you look on the right, with all the movement that's happening around and your eye following around, we do have this larger form here. It typically starts here and moves around these images in the middle, whereas here there's a lot of broken up in pieces. So those are differences in style within the Roman culture. And we've got that. So that was the column of Antonius in Rome. It was a column that was erected to honor Antonius. We've got repetitive design. These are two different sides of it. So we've got the right and the left. So it is comparing and contrasting and starting more into a new type of design, which is up here in the right. Marcus Aurelius. This is propaganda art. We have Marcus, who was a leader, again, larger than his horse. Typically, he'd be a little bit smaller than that. Usually in a equestrian statue is what this is called. Usually in an equestrian statue, they are idealized. They've got their hand out talking to the people. The horse's hoof is up once like it's prancing. They believe at one point maybe a person he was conquering, his head would have been under here. And for a while it was mistaken for Constantine, which is why it survived, because a lot of the older stuff was eliminated and melted down. Now we're talking about sarcophagi, or sarcophagus here. So this is in the later Roman Empire. Sorry. Looking at history here, and I've got my slides off. So these are two different types of sarcophagi. So you still see the influence of the Etruscans here on the top. The arcuated post and lintel structure here of the Greeks, but then we also see Roman influences. We've got mummy portraits that on the right side. It was a painted board that was placed on top like a funerary mask. Lots of reliefs usually portrayed gods and heroes onto their sculpture, and it became very popular in the high and late imperial ages. So late imperial. The Severans. So the Severan dynasty ended with Severus Alexander, which put Rome in a civil war for the next half a century. Stinking Severans. The Severans were African born, but this gentleman said he was the son of Marcus Aurelius. What we also needed to talk about with Marcus Aurelius back here. Hello, Marcus. His son, the Roman power began to kind of erode at this time, and it was very difficult to keep order. So Marcus's son Commodus, his assassination brought the end to this dynasty, to Marcus Aurelius's dynasty. Imperial bureaucracy was very disintegrating, meaning that they were kind of falling apart. Official state religions were losing their ground to other religions, including Christianity. So during the time of Nero, the Christians and a lot of that era, the Christians were so persecuted that they were burnt in the streets as torches. It was terrible, terrible time. The official state religion began losing its ground to other religions, again, including Christianity, which the whole society gradually gave way to Christianity. Then the Severans came in. Septimus Severus was African born, again, said he was Marcus Aurelius' son, and so then he wore his hair like Marcus Aurelius. That's why he looks like this. Ta-da! He put Rome in civil war for the next half century again. Rome was ruled by one general after another, which it was that anyway before, but it had had a pretty stable environment with Marcus Aurelius and Commodus. So we've got the Severans. These were the soldier emperors. We've got this gentleman right here, right? So I'm not going to go through all the soldier emperors that happened, but it happened very quickly. And you can tell they began to really show personality. So you can tell what type of emperor each one of these people were. Okay, I'm going to have to stop for now. Okay, so again, we have the soldier emperors happening here. Each of they're not equestrian statues, but they are propaganda statues. Each of these pieces of propaganda show the type of emperor they are on their faces and in their stance. So we have this Gallus over here, tall, large man in the nude. I will be right back. So Gallus is in the nude, very strong stance. He's barefooted, again, meaning that he's heroic. And then we have over here Philip of Arabia. Looks he's strong, but more pondering, wise. And then we have Trajan Decius, who is different than the earlier Trajan we talked about. But we have deep lines and bags under his eyes that shows the out-of-control world when he was an emperor. It's really weighing on the culture of the time. The Ludovisi battle sarcophagus. What we're seeing here is what we saw earlier, way back here. The movement of form around the piece. We're seeing that it's more of a impression of what battle is really like. There's bodies everywhere, writhing in pain, those sort of things. We'll talk more about this during our discussions in class because, again, this is one of your artifacts. So we're looking at which one of these, if you compare and contrast, show classical characteristics. Well, definitely the one on the right, right? This is the Tetrarchs. So after all of the soldier emperors occurred, a tetrarch depicts 4 emperors which ruled at one time. They kind of divided power equally, so then it created a more stable environment for Rome at the time. I'll be right back again. So again, what we're seeing here is that division of power, trying to create a more peaceful society. Because the Roman people, or the sculptor here, is trying to portray this even division of power, the forms are more stylized. We have the no emotion on faces, the same kind of gestures, squat body, stubby proportion, very not realistic. It's very stylized. Again, they're all very similar. You see some specific characteristics, but they're all very similar in stance, with the right or the left hand holding their swords, and the image wrapping around the corner. Okay, so now we're coming into Constantine. Whoops, sorry. So Constantine was the son of one of these tetrarchs. Once the father died, he invaded it. Once Constantine's father died, he invaded Italy and defeated the general there. Defeated one of the rulers that ruled Italy at the time, one of those 4 tetrarchs, and took control over the capital, which claimed victory with the help from God, saying that it was for the help from God. He and his co-emperor Licinius issued Edict of Milan, ending the persecutions of Christians. So the persecuting Christians ended up becoming less, but still very prevalent. So Constantine completely ended that persecution. Licinius and Constantine became foes in a battle that Constantine ended up winning and killing Licinius. Constantine found the new Rome and Byzantium and named it Constantinople. I'm sure you guys have heard all this and you know about Constantine. He's the first great Christian emperor that moved the Roman Empire into the Christian faith. So 325 Christianity became at 325 CE, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Many historians believe that the transfer of the seat from Rome to Constantinople and the adoption of Christianity marked the end of antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages. It was time for Rome to move out and for progression to move in. Then we start into the Byzantine Empire, which is another complete content area. So what you're seeing here is a very famous arch. It's the Arch of Constantine. It commemorates Constantine's victory over Maxentius, who was the leader of the Italian people when he came in. Many of the aspects of this arch, this victory arch, they were all taken from different areas of Rome, basically kind of thieved. We'll talk more about this in class. But we have basically on each aspect of this arch, we've got different great kings that, or great rulers of Rome that Constantine was basically pulling together to show his power. So we've got Trajan here. We've got these being Trajan here, the blue. We have Marcus Aurelius here. We have Hadrian here. Then we've got Constantine himself. Okay. So under Constantine's rule was Basilica Nova. This was the original, or there was the original site of Christian faith. So it has a brick facade, brick and concrete facade, 20-foot thick walls. Holy Toledo. The walls were supported by a bare vaulted ceiling. This is when we start to see that fenestrated groin vault that we talked about earlier. And we've got the enthroned gigantic sculpture of Constantine on one side. The interior and the sculpture of Constantine kind of dwarfs other humans. It's enormous. We'll see the head of it here in a second. And Constantine sat in the apse, which the apse is like a jut out. It's the curve right here. So it's like a little containing area. So here is the head of Constantine. This is the head. If you see this lady right here, it's taller than her. If you picked her up, whoop, and sat her up here, she'd only come out to about here. She's maybe as tall as his hands. So the head is 8.5 feet on its own. It's part of the seated statue that was about 30 feet tall, enthroned in the Basilica of Constantine. It wore a metal crown, which was attached to its brow. You can kind of see the line happening. He is slightly stylized. Obviously, his eyes were not that big. It was an idealized portrait, and it was timeless. The hand is 5.5 feet tall on its own. That is the same height as me. It was marble. There were some wooden elements that have decayed now, and it stood at the temple. Okay, so I apologize for all the breaks that occurred during this. People keep coming in and out of the room. So if you have any questions on Monday, remember to make sure that you took notes through the whole thing. Try to go back through and review and follow along with your book as you went along. I'll see you Monday, guys. Thanks.